The billionaire real estate CEO slid a purchase contract across the old diner counter with absolute confidence, convinced that by sunset the beloved little restaurant would become another luxury development. Then a young waitress reached beneath the register, placed a faded black and white photograph beside the contract, and quietly whispered a secret that made the most powerful businessman in the room forget how to breathe. Within seconds, the deal that had seemed inevitable became the beginning of a story neither of them had imagined. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue growing through stories that remind us that compassion is often worth far more than money. At 44, Preston Hale had built an empire by seeing opportunities where everyone else saw aging buildings. His company had transformed abandoned factories into thriving neighborhoods, empty warehouses into beautiful apartment communities, and forgotten commercial districts into modern destinations. Financial magazines praised his vision. Investors admired his discipline. Competitors respected his instincts. Yet the people closest to him quietly recognized something the headlines never mentioned. Every promotion, every acquisition, and every new skyscraper seemed to leave him a little more distant from the world around him. Years earlier, Preston had lost both parents within a short period of time. Throwing himself into work became easier than facing grief. Success slowly became a shield protecting him from emotions he no longer knew how to express. His calendar overflowed with meetings, but his home remained painfully quiet. Every achievement looked impressive on paper, yet very few brought lasting happiness. One bright autumn morning, Preston arrived in the small riverside town of Ashbrook. His newest project involved purchasing several neighboring properties to create a mixed-use development featuring offices, restaurants, parks, and housing. Nearly every property owner had already accepted generous offers. Only one building remained. Harper's Diner. The little restaurant had served homemade breakfasts and lunches for nearly 70 years. Its faded blue sign leaned slightly toward the street. The booths showed decades of gentle wear. Old photographs covered nearly every wall. Tourists occasionally stopped because locals insisted no visit to Ashbrook felt complete without eating there. From Preston's perspective, sentiment couldn't compete with economics. The property occupied the perfect corner lot. He intended to buy it before lunch. Inside the diner, 23-year-old Eliana Brooks balanced 3 plates effortlessly while greeting nearly every customer by name. She had worked there since high school after her grandmother, Miriam, became unable to manage every shift alone. Most visitors assumed Eliana simply waited tables. Few realized she quietly managed bookkeeping, supplier relationships, maintenance schedules, and payroll while finishing an online business degree. The diner wasn't simply a workplace. It represented her family's history. Her late grandfather had built it almost entirely by hand after returning from military service decades earlier. Every booth carried memories. Every recipe held family traditions. Every customer felt like extended family. When Preston entered wearing an expensive tailored suit, conversations subtly slowed. He ordered coffee politely. Eliana served him with the same warmth she offered everyone else. Only after finishing breakfast did Preston introduce himself. He calmly explained his development plans before sliding a professionally prepared purchase agreement across the counter. The offer exceeded the property's market value by nearly 3 times. Most people would have accepted immediately. Instead, Eliana smiled sadly. She gently pushed the papers back toward him. She explained that not everything meaningful could be measured by numbers. Preston remained courteous but persistent. He described future jobs, economic growth, modernization, increased tourism. Everything sounded reasonable, even inspiring. Yet something about Eliana's calm confidence unsettled him. She quietly disappeared into a small office before returning with a faded photograph. The picture showed an elderly man standing proudly outside the newly completed diner beside another young man wearing work clothes covered in sawdust. She placed it beside Preston's contract. Then she revealed the secret. The younger carpenter in the photograph was Preston's father. Long before becoming an architect, his father had spent one unforgettable summer helping build Harper's Diner while saving money for college. Eliana explained that her grandfather often shared stories about a hard-working young carpenter named Thomas Hale who dreamed of designing buildings that would improve people's lives. Preston stared silently at the photograph. He recognized his father immediately. His chest tightened. He had never seen this picture before. Eliana quietly added another detail. Her grandfather always said Thomas refused payment for the final month of construction because Miriam's family struggled financially after unexpected medical bills. Instead, he asked only one thing in return. "Promise me this place always feeds anyone who's hungry." For 70 years, Harper's Diner honored that promise. Every afternoon, one meal remained available for anyone unable to pay. No questions asked. No embarrassment. Simply kindness. Preston suddenly looked around the restaurant differently. The walls no longer appeared outdated. They carried history. The worn counter wasn't damaged. It reflected decades of conversations. The building wasn't simply real estate. It represented a promise his own father helped create. For the first time in years, Preston quietly folded the contract without another word. He thanked Eliana for sharing the photograph. Then he left. Over the following week, Preston couldn't stop thinking about the diner. He searched old family boxes stored in his attic. Hidden beneath dusty blueprints, he discovered a leather journal belonging to his father. Inside appeared dozens of handwritten entries describing that summer in Ashbrook. Thomas wrote about believing buildings should never exist merely to generate profit. They should strengthen communities. One page described Harper's Diner specifically. "If I ever become successful, I hope I never forget that the smallest places often hold the biggest hearts." Reading those words left Preston overwhelmed. Somewhere along the journey toward success, he had forgotten exactly what inspired his family in the first place. The following Saturday afternoon, Preston returned to Ashbrook without lawyers, assistants, or business partners. He ordered the same breakfast. This time he stayed. He watched neighbors greet one another. Teachers sharing lunch with retired firefighters. Construction workers laughing beside doctors. Teenagers helping elderly customers carry trays. A young boy quietly slipped several dollars into the anonymous meal jar near the register after overhearing someone else's lunch had been covered. No signs advertised generosity. It simply existed naturally. Eliana eventually sat beside him during a quiet moment. She admitted fearing wealthy developers because too many communities lost cherished gathering places in pursuit of bigger profits. Preston nodded honestly. He admitted she wasn't entirely wrong. Then he surprised both of them. Instead of asking to buy the diner again, he asked whether she would help him understand why people loved it so deeply. Over the following month, Preston visited almost every weekend. He met farmers whose grandparents once ate breakfast there. Police officers celebrating retirements. Couples who met inside neighboring booths decades earlier. Children proudly showing report cards because free pie awaited every good grade. Every story connected people rather than transactions. Something inside Preston slowly changed. Then another unexpected challenge arrived. A regional corporation offered Miriam an even larger amount than Preston originally proposed. Unlike Preston, they planned demolishing the diner immediately. The financial pressure felt enormous. Years of repairs had drained savings. Miriam quietly admitted refusing such an offer might jeopardize everything. Eliana feared losing both the diner and her grandmother's lifelong dream. When Preston learned about the situation, many assumed he would simply outbid the corporation. Instead, he spent days reviewing financial records, architectural plans, and community resources. Finally, he presented a completely different solution. Rather than purchasing Harper's Diner, his company would invest in restoring the historic building while leaving ownership entirely with Miriam's family. In exchange, the diner would become the centerpiece of the surrounding development instead of disappearing beneath it. The new park, public square, and walking paths would all connect naturally to the restaurant. Visitors wouldn't come despite the diner. They would come because of it. Investors initially questioned the decision. Some argued sentiment reduced profitability. Preston calmly presented detailed projections proving authentic community landmarks attracted longer-term economic growth than generic commercial spaces. For the first time in years, profit followed purpose instead of replacing it. Construction began several months later. Historic preservation specialists carefully strengthened the aging structure. Local artists restored vintage signs. High school students helped create historical displays featuring photographs donated by longtime residents. One display proudly included the faded picture of Thomas Hale helping build the diner. Preston visited frequently, sometimes carrying lumber alongside volunteers despite possessing little free time. People gradually stopped seeing him as the wealthy outsider. They simply called him Preston. One afternoon, while sorting old storage boxes, Eliana discovered another envelope addressed to anyone who still believes kindness builds stronger foundations than concrete. Inside rested a handwritten letter from her grandfather. He described the young carpenter who worked harder than anyone else despite receiving almost no money. He predicted that if Thomas ever remembered the lessons learned inside Harper's Diner, countless lives would someday benefit. Reading the letter together left both Preston and Eliana speechless. It felt as though someone from another generation had quietly guided them toward the same destination. Months later, the revitalized district officially opened beneath bright blue skies. Families filled the sidewalks. Musicians performed. Children played in fountains. Small businesses flourished. At the center stood Harper's Diner, exactly where it always belonged. Only stronger. Brighter. More welcoming than ever. During the dedication ceremony, Preston declined speaking first. Instead, he invited Miriam. The elderly woman looked across hundreds of smiling faces before explaining that communities aren't remembered for their tallest buildings. They're remembered for how they make people feel when they walk through the front door. After thunderous applause, Preston finally addressed the crowd. He admitted believing success meant acquiring more property. Now he understood real success meant protecting places that already made life richer. Then, with tears quietly forming, he unveiled a bronze plaque near the entrance. It read, "Built by neighbors. Strengthened by kindness. Protected for future generations." Inspired by Thomas Hale and every person who believed people matter more than profit. Months passed. Preston gradually reduced his corporate responsibilities, creating a foundation dedicated to preserving historic family-owned businesses across the country. Eliana completed her business degree and became managing director of Harper's Diner while expanding its community meal program. Working side by side through restoration projects, fundraising events, and neighborhood improvements, their friendship slowly deepened into something neither expected. Unlike dramatic romances built overnight, theirs grew through shared purpose. One sunny afternoon, Preston invited Eliana to the riverside park overlooking the diner. Children laughed nearby. Families filled picnic tables. Everything they had worked to preserve surrounded them. He admitted she hadn't merely saved an old building. She had rescued a part of himself he thought success had permanently buried. Eliana smiled through grateful tears. She confessed she almost judged him entirely by his expensive suit and impressive title. Instead, she discovered someone still searching for the values his father once carried. Beneath warm afternoon sunlight, surrounded by the very community that unknowingly brought them together, they chose to begin building a future together, one defined not by wealth or status, but by compassion, service, and purpose. Before this story comes to an end, we'd love to hear from you. If you had the power to save one meaningful place from your childhood, a diner, bookstore, park, school, or family business, what would it be, and why? Leave a meaningful comment below because your memory might inspire someone else to cherish the places that shaped their own life. Preston eventually learned that the greatest investment isn't measured in dollars but in the lives touched by our decisions. Eliana discovered that standing firmly for what matters can transform even the hardest heart. And Harper's Diner continued serving meals every afternoon, always keeping one plate ready for anyone who couldn't afford it, honoring a promise made by two young builders generations earlier. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May this story remind you that the strongest foundations are never poured from concrete alone. They are built from kindness, protected by courage, and remembered through love that continues serving others long after the builders are gone.